Hey guys, I finished reading The Wren in the Holly Library by K.A. Linde. This is my review. Quick synopsis. We are following Kierce, who is our FMC. She is a thief and she is drawn into a world of urban magic in this dystopian novel. The setting takes place in New York City, but after monsters have come out to the world, there was a monster war, and then a monster treaty was signed in order to kind of clean up the destruction that happened and kind of bring a little bit more peace to what's left of the globe. We're going to pause really quick because this review does contain spoilers, and it does contain some major spoilers. So if you're planning on reading this and you haven't read it yet, you're probably not going to want to listen to this. You can come back and watch the video later. In my review, we're going to go over the characters, craft, plot, romance, the world build, and the magic system kind of clumped together, and then my overall thoughts on if I would recommend this and who I would recommend this to. Kierce is a fierce I said that out loud after having read it in my notes, and when I read it out loud, I was like, oh, that rhymes. That sounds weird, but it's true. Anyways, she is a fierce FMC and she knows where her loyalties lie. She's willing to make some really risky moves in order to keep herself and her friends safe. I loved the physical and the mental strength that was portrayed through her character, as well as the fact that she is constantly working through different plans for multiple scenarios in order to stay one step ahead of the game. And she's trying to perceive the world from the eyes of others so that she can kind of plot against them, which tracks because she's a professional thief. And so she's always looking for her exits. And we actually see Kierce in action, which I absolutely love. Like, her thieving is validated within this book. It's not like, oh my goodness, Kierce is a great thief, and then we see her do like one thing that's mediocre and just keep getting told that she's great. Like, the thieving is a big part of this, and there is a heist, but the heist isn't necessarily a big part of this. So if you're going into the novel like, oh, it's a heist novel, it's going to be like Six of Crows, I'm going to tell you right now, it's not. So don't go into it and then be disappointed by that factor, because you will be. This is a romantasy, and we do get a love interest in Graves, but at no point does Kierce actually put her own goals aside or change where her loyalties truly lie due to the feelings that she's developing for Graves. And I really appreciated that, because in so many of the books that I've read recently, I've seen the FMCs soften or like change the goal from the beginning of the book to align more with what the MMC wants. And that doesn't happen here. And I appreciated that, because I'm tired of seeing our FMCs change what really matters to them based upon the whims of the MMC. What I do feel like lacked in her character was the exploration of trauma. As I mentioned, she's a thief, and she did have a mentor who trained her to be the most amazing thief, and her mentor was super abusive. But we don't necessarily get that through the way that Kierce walks the world and perceives different experiences. It's so very close to being used as a plot device, and I don't like those abusive mentor relationships to be used as plot devices, either to create sympathy in the reader or to, explain away some different things that happen. I really felt that the trauma itself was kind of a side burner thing that was used to elevate other parts of the plot and parts of her character story, and I did not like that. I don't think the trauma was written well here. But all in all, we do get a very strong, very fierce, very easy to identify with character in Kierce. Graves is our MMC, and he is a multifaceted character that is extremely intriguing in and of itself with his backstory. He views the world similarly to Kierce, or his mind works similarly to Kierce, in the fact that he's constantly like trying to plot and stay ahead of others. And the fact that, he can, with his warlock powers, kind of sense what others are thinking in the moment. And so there's a lot of plotting and scheming and allusions to like the ability to psychologically analyze another person and read body language and such, which I think is great considering the fact that Kierce is a thief and the fact that Graves is this very powerful warlock who bases his power upon knowledge and knowing things and reading, which is why he has a great library. He's very respectful at all times, but he's also distant, and that plays into the mystery of him. And I love me an MMC that's got some mystery. So immediately, as soon as there was like this aura to him that was like, you can't ever know all of me, I was like, sold, I'm in. We're gonna get to know you. And we do get enough of his backstory and his history to like keep me invested and keep me intrigued and like laying the little breadcrumbs to where I was following along. But the issue here that we're going to get to later is that this was one subplot in so many that I ended up losing interest in almost all of them. So far as the secondary characters go, they do feel fairly fleshed out and well-rounded, but there's so many of them that they start to load down the text. The two secondary characters that I truly appreciated, though, were Kierce's best friends, because we get up front that there is a pre-existing relationship here, but as the story goes on, that relationship is built on page, and I did truly start to care for those characters as well, which is important because at the end, you know, there's this trinity that's created that's magically going to be important to the series as a whole. Oh, the craft. Like a lot of what I'm seeing coming out of Red Tower Publishing, this read slightly better than a first draft. And on the one hand, I always do hand some of that to the author. You know, like you wrote this, and so this is indicative of your craft. But I also think a huge part of that is the team that surrounds the author pushing it out to publication. I think Red Tower Publishing, and I might make a video on this, I probably won't though, just because I'm bogged down and don't have the time for the research. But I feel like they're pumping out books as fast as they can because they're making money off of it. And so we're getting mediocre craft. And on the one hand, again, that comes down to the author and their writing style. But it also comes down to developmental editors, copy editors, the entire team not putting out a product that's been swept the way that it should have been. And don't get me wrong, like this is an extremely readable book. I finished this in 2 days listening to it on audio. But that being said, such simple, basic edits needed to happen, and I can't understand why they didn't. Things like an entire paragraph that was she action at the beginning. She heard this. She ran here. She felt this. She exploited this situation. For an entire paragraph, which especially when you're listening to it on audio stunts the prose and it pulls you out of the story, and then that's what you start listening to because it doesn't sound organic. It doesn't sound correct. It did wear down the prose. It did make things sound clunky. The dialogue especially felt inauthentic, I guess you could say. Like it felt scripted. It didn't feel like two people just having a conversation or multiple people having a conversation, which made a lot of the story feel forced, especially listening to it on audio. And I could go on with similar instances like this, but that kind of gives you an idea of what craft looks like here. And again, I read this in 2 days. It by no means kept me from reading the novel, but it did lend to my reflection of being like, that wasn't that great. When it comes to the plot, when I tell you that the concept was so cool and I was hooked at the beginning, for the first 3-4 chapters, you know, I picked up on the craft, but I was like, whatever, it's fine. If it's a good story, I'll go with it. We start off with this heist concept, which is what I think comes across in the like trade copy for the synopsis that Goodreads has, and that would be on the book. Which is why I wanted to preface this video by saying, if you're coming into it for the heist, don't. So we start off with that, and then we get like this very slight nod to Beauty and the Beast, like that kind of tropiness and stuff like that. And it's a slight nod. It's just the tiniest one because they enter into a deal and then Kierce has to stay with Graves. But the more that this story progressed, the more we got like bogged down in side quests to the point where I was like, I don't even feel like the main plot is getting enough attention. Instead, everything is spread equally, and I'm not sure what I'm actually supposed to be focusing on because it doesn't quite feel interconnected. And in fantasy, we'll get that. In fantasy, we'll get a main plot, 3 to 4 subplots, and then little threads that are scattered in, especially if it's going to be a longer series that kind of are Easter eggs that get picked back up on. It's different when, to create an analogy, you're walking through the forest, there's a fork in the road, except there are 10 different paths that you can take, and you walk halfway down each of them. Like, that's what this story was like. It's like we just would start walking down one, we'd come back, we'd walk down another one, we'd come back, we'd walk down another one, we'd come back, and at that point, you're not making any progress. And also at that point, you kind of don't know where you're going anymore and which path you're supposed to be paying attention to. I couldn't even tell you who the main antagonist is. I can tell you who it should be. It's supposed to be King Louis, who is head of the Men of Valor. But he doesn't get very much page time. And then when we finally do meet him in what's meant to be like the epic battle climax of the book, before a secondary epic battle like climax situation, it takes maybe a page to defeat him. Like, it's not a big deal. It's very convenient. And even when we met him, he didn't feel like the big bad, because there were so many things going on that it didn't quite feel as though we had been working up to him as an antagonist, even though the author very much so did try to make that happen. I mean, we get the issues with the monster treaty. We get the existence of magic when there's not supposed to be magic. We get the feuding gangs and the territories that have been separated into in New York. We get the dissonance between monsters and humans. We get the epic eternal battle between the Holly King and the Winter King. We get the semi-love triangle between Kierce and the Kings. We get the wish dust drug. We get the extinction of the Fae. We get Kierce's lost heritage and lost memories. We get the bombshell that she's like this magical wisp at the end. That's why her magic wasn't right. I mean, it's just on and on and on and on it goes. And by the end of it, I was like, I just almost don't even care, because I don't know what I'm supposed to be focusing on, because it's not being woven together well. It's being like thrown at you. And at that point, when everything is given equal weight, it's difficult to decide what should I be holding above everything else, because you can't focus on all of it at once. It became a super disjointed plot because of so many subplots, and it also left room for a lot of plot holes. So it was hard to stay invested, and it makes me think, well, what am I here for? Because the monster plot kind of gets dropped to the sideline. I do think that the Irish folklore and mythology is truly fascinating, but there are other books that do Irish folklore and mythology and Celtic folklore and mythology better, and so that's what I would want to spend my time reading. And then we get the romance, which, with this being a romantasy, I was expecting a lot more out of the romance, and it didn't hit. I do truly think that Kierce and Graves have the compatibility to have a good romantic connection. And we start out with a lust-filled relationship, which I think actually works. Like, they're very physically attracted to one another, and that's something that can be built upon. But it felt like the author started to run out of space in the first installment of this series, probably because there are so many plots that she tries to incorporate here. And so by the end, we're still in that lust zone. We haven't established a solid, good emotional connection. And then it basically kind of becomes an insta-love trope where all of a sudden they're very emotionally connected, and it was not genuine. And so the question was, if this is going to be a series, why did we have to force that love connection at the end? And it's because we get set up for what I believe is going to be a love triangle with Kierce and Graves, who is the Holly King, and Kierce and whoever he is. I forgot his name. And I don't have the physical copy of the book in front of me yet. But the Oak King. So it almost felt like, for the sake of plot, these two had to have their connection. Graves and Kierce had to have that like love between one another so that it could be broken to create more tension if she starts to become interested in the Oak King. Because when we end this installment, it's hinted at that the Oak King has a previous past relationship with Kierce that she doesn't know about because she doesn't have her memories, which I personally kind of don't like, again, because it didn't feel organic or authentic. It very much felt like, this is the plot and we're going to make it happen no matter what. And like I said, that hurts, because I truly do think that a good intimate emotional relationship could have been built on top of the physical attraction that they had, because Kierce and Graves see the world so similarly and they have trust issues and have started learning how to trust one another like this much, like had started to learn how to trust one another this much, and then we're saying I love you. But it got rushed, and I'm sure in book 2 we're gonna have like this split of affection between Kierce and Graves and Kierce and the Oak King, and I don't want a half-shot love triangle. I'd rather have one good solid relationship. And the spicy scenes weren't quite my cup of tea. I don't know why, but there was this disconnect where, like, when they were happening, I just kind of wasn't interested, and I was petering around in my kitchen cleaning and things like that, was not super tuned into them. If I had to guess, I would think it goes back to that whole craft and dialogue thing. Like, the dialogue was odd to me during those scenes, but there had to have been something more, and I can't pin down what it was. And lastly, we have the world build in the magic system. So the concept of a post-apocalyptic world that was being rebuilt after a monster war and a monster treaty to try and get like all of the underworld type situation coexisting and cohabiting, and then our FMC being a thief that was like working for the monsters and the humans, stealing art. I mean, hooked. I was in it. The beginning of the story really lent to this world build. We get some backstory of the monster war, the clash between the vampires and the werewolves, and the vampire leader that died that became a martyr and kind of created this push for a treaty. And then we kind of stop delving into that aspect of it, and we plot hop over here to a different setting within this world, which focuses on Irish mythology and the war between the Holly King and the Oak King. And it's not that these two can't coexist within the same plot, it's that we don't spend enough time with either, and so neither of them get the development needed to create a true storyline. And so when you think about the world build and how the magic system fits in, I don't even know how to explain the magic system to you. I mean, we get some explanation of it for certain, because Kierce is trying to figure out how to use her magic, which doesn't even matter because she's a wisp, which everybody thought was extinct. And so the magic system doesn't necessarily fit into the world, other than the fact that with the monster treaty, and Kierce repeats this over and over and over again, it was a big deal that there was no magic. Just monsters, no magic. So magic must be a big deal and a big part of this at some point, but it didn't really come in this novel. And if somebody were to ask me like, oh, well, what's the magic system? I would say, I don't know, some people have it and some people don't, and they have little symbols in their warding. And they, like, whenever they use up their power, they have to recharge by doing something that they love. And that's about all I kind of really got. It didn't seem to actually be intertwined with the world. So overall, how did I feel? This was definitely a fun read. Like I said, I finished it within 2 days. It started off really strong, and then it's almost like it dropped off the unique qualities that made it so interesting and created that hook, and fell into really common fantasy tropes, and then started trying to do far too much. Our FMC does face a lot of obstacles, and we do see her talent as a thief in those obstacles. That being said, almost all of them, in fact, probably all of them, were solved with extremely convenient, like, Hail Mary moments. The plot was extremely disjointed, and the ending wasn't good. I don't know how to describe the ending other than saying, like, I just kind of wrinkled my nose and was like, what? So I guess I'll say that I found this really fun in the moment, and then it was a letdown in the conclusion, and a day later I had already kind of forgotten that this book existed until I went to my journal and was like, oh yeah, I read that book, I need to write the review, and then I need to record the review. I don't plan on finishing this series because there are just far better books out there that have the things that this has but do it better, like monster apocalypse type thing. You know, if you want that, then I would point you towards A Deadly Education with Naomi Novik. If you want Irish mythology or Celtic mythology, then I would point you towards The Temptation of Magic. If you want romance or romantasy, almost anything that you're picking up right now could be considered romantasy because it's got romance and it's got fantasy in it. If you're looking for a really quick read, you can fly through this. You really can. And if that's what you want, I would definitely say pick this up. But if you're wanting one of the other things, like I said, there are better options out there.